Hi there, I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart, where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with and the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives. I'd like to welcome all of you who are listening to our podcast, who are watching it on YouTube, and especially to this rowdy crowd. Here at the Sacred Heart University Community Theatre in beautiful downtown Fairfield, Connecticut. Our media sponsor for tonight's event is WSHU Public Radio, the community source for NPR news and classical music. Check them out on WSHU.org to listen live, read their news stories, and find out which radio frequencies to tune into. Over 50 years ago, and it's hard to believe, two crazy kids met and spent part of their lives together. They were young actors with stars in their eyes, and one of those actors, Susan Sarandon, is my guest tonight. And her star indeed rose with a long list of indelible roles to her credit. This extremely versatile actress brings her own brand of intelligence and sex appeal to every role, from her fearless portrayal of Annie Savoy in Bull Durham, to her Oscar-nominated performances in Thelma and Louise, Lorenzo's Oil, The Client, and Atlantic City, and to her Oscar-winning performance as Sister Helen in Dead Man Walking. You also may remember her from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, The Hunger, Witches of Eastwick, too many films to mention, folks. Her diverse and challenging television projects include Emmy nominations for portraying Betty Davis in Ryan Murphy's Feud, Betty and Joan, and HBO's Bernard and Doris, as well as guest appearances on such series as Friends, Malcolm in the Middle, ER, 30 Rock, many, many, many more. And finally, if you don't know why we share a last name, you'll soon find out. Ladies and gentlemen, Susan Sarandon. Well, first of all, the ordeal getting here. Yeah. They left at what, 3:45 or something like that?
4.
4 o'clock.
4. It was pretty crazy getting out of the city.
Oh, boy.
I came from Manhattan, that city.
Yes.
And yeah, it was crazy.
Well,
I know, it's like a pilgrimage to get here, actually.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
It was like, and then you...
Memorial Day weekend also.
But it's Thursday, it's not the weekend yet.
Everybody takes off. Everybody takes off early. I know. We thought we planned ahead. Anyway, let's dive in, all right? So, the first thing I ask when we do these things is provenance, where you're from.
New York. I was born in New York. At a certain point, we moved to New Jersey. I'm the oldest of 9. And Queens was too expensive, so we went to New Jersey, where my parents bought one of those tract houses and had more kids there. And then I ended up back in New York after, well, with you, actually.
Right.
Yeah, that guy.
We moved into the city.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about your parents. Tell me about your mom and dad.
Well.
I mean, not that I don't know, but
yes.
Do it anyway.
Well, you can watch Who Do You Think You Are if you want to know the complicated family history of my mom, because she was put in foster care and then into Catholic Charities at a girls' school in Long Island. And I mention this because this will give me an excuse for not being able to cook, because she didn't really grow up with a mom. She was really in an institution, and so she then found herself with all these children and, relied on tuna fish casserole and Spam and Campbell's soup and all of that stuff, and was not, didn't have the background of, I don't know if she could have cooked it anyway with 9 kids. It probably would have been pretty hard. And my dad was also from New York, New Jersey area. Right. So East Coast people, and I've always been East Coast. I never really lived in LA except if I was working. My kids were all raised New York eccentric, crazy kids.
Right.
And
your dad had something of a history in show business, didn't he?
Oh yeah, he did. My dad was he also didn't really have parents. His dad, died when he was younger, and then his mom was kind of didn't deal with that, and he ended up being out on his own quite young and became a band singer in the days of the big band, and met my mom on a train between gigs. It was so, romantic. And then the war broke out, and at a certain point she thought he had shipped out, and he sent her a message and said he hadn't, and why don't they get married? And she asked her friend, the way she tells it, she asked her friend who was sitting on the toilet, and the friend said, well, he probably won't come back. So with that romantic beginning,
yes, right,
they
launched nine ships.
Yeah, with many other losses in between. So, yeah.
So tell me about, because even if she didn't cook, obviously there were meals. What did the meals consist of? Did she do?
Tuna casserole was a big one for Fridays,
Right.
where you get your noodles and your Campbell mushroom soup and your can of tuna fish. We had lots of pasta all the time, with tomato sauce and whatever. And I think she picked up some skills later, but while I was in the house, I don't remember there being big meals. My dad actually cooked the big meals like Thanksgiving.
That's the next
Although
question.
there would be some kind of a major flare-up, and he would leave before the middle of the meal even, he would cook all day. And at a certain point in this little house, there would be a table in the dining room, and then the kitchen had another little round table, so there was never room for everyone to be at the same table. So they never figured out they should have two of everything. So someone was always taking the turkey, the gravy, to the other kids, and then coming back, and back and forth. And that was the little house that when I was mostly there that I.
Now this was a house in which town?
It was in. It was
Edison?
near Metuchen, but technically in Edison, which is how I ended up in Edison High School, public high school, the only one in my family, which is where they went wrong, as my mom told me.
Right.
Everyone else went to Catholic, and I went to a public high school with 500 in my grade.
Me too.
And that's when I learned that the Jewish kids were not at all repentant about killing Jesus. That was my exposure, because we grew up in a grammar school in Metuchen, where I think the whole school was maybe populated by 20 families, a minimum of 7 kids. The Pondells had like 16, the McKennas had at least 16, 18 kids. So close together, they looked like they'd been mimeographed. The gene pool never got a chance to in any way mutate.
Right.
And so we just grew up with, families that had tons and tons of kids. It didn't seem like a big deal. And then I went to public school.
Right. So back at the house, all right? So what was it like around the table? Was it chaotic?
Yeah. I remember very vividly my poor mom. I mean, you look back, I just have 3 kids, and after 2, you're outnumbered. So you can imagine when there's that many. I remember her, and my sister Mandy might be in the audience somewhere.
I hope so, because I haven't seen Mandy in a long time.
Yeah, getting pissed off at my brother Phil and taking the Campbell soup bowl and just putting it on his head. And looking at him with these noodles and things like off his ears, and drinking milk and trying not to laugh, but having the milk come out your nose. And that was kind of typical. I remember there was a nice dining room. We added on to this little house that my parents bought for like $17,000. I saw the, when they divided up farmers' fields, and they would put just these little tract houses, and we spent most of our childhood like in a penitentiary picking rocks out of the yard. There's pictures of us with bleached hair from being outside picking up rocks so that a lawn would grow. And my dad planted tons of trees and put in a split level fence, and it got grown so beautifully. I went by there years ago, but it was completely overgrown. But when we moved in, it was pretty sad looking yard. But we didn't know. And so we spent a lot of time outside, or in one of those little tiny blow up pools and things like that. Yeah, that was my childhood.
Well, the folks here are, I'm sure, very familiar with the rock story, because we call them Connecticut potatoes. Yes. My daughter, Alexis, at one point had a big garden in our backyard, and they spent 3 months cleaning rocks out of it so that they could just plow it under and raise some crops. We've now, sort of converted the garden. But I'm back at your idyllic
So
childhood.
it's a shame there's not a market for that.
Well, there is. Look at all the walls around here.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. But not in this place in New Jersey.
Yeah,
no.
yeah. Okay, so chaos around the table. Was there any conversation?
No. I don't think so, unless it was somebody fighting. I don't know, Mandy, correct me, but I don't know. We didn't have discussions and stuff. It was just
Right.
like, are you going to finish that? You can't leave till you finish that. You know, I want that. I mean, everyone ate very fast. It was more of a maintenance rather than a kind of
Right.
enjoyable meal. There
Right.
wasn't really that.
Right.
No, I don't, not to my...
So lots of casseroles, lots of, any spam?
Oh, yeah. Yes, and bologna.
Oh, yeah.
From the bologna animal.
Oh, yes.
You know, from the,
Right.
yeah.
The bologna bees.
I don't know,
Yeah.
still don't, I'm afraid to find out what's in bologna or spam. But we would do it on the grill and then squish down the white Wonder Bread with the spam or with the, you know, whatever. And yeah, PBJs. I believe we had PBJs. And then when we had to pack the lunches.
That was the next question.
There you go.
There you go.
My dad liked a lot of gimmicks, you know, so there were stamps with all our names. And so you would stamp all the little brown bags that would be going for lunches and sandwiches. I don't think we had packaged potato chips or anything like that. Probably pretty, you know, uneventful.
What were the lunches like?
I think pretty...
Basic bologna and...
Yeah, I just
PBJ.
remember peanut butter PBJs. I don't remember them being too... interesting, actually.
Do you remember, did you guys ever go out to dinner with this horde?
I don't think so. Well, not when, you know, when I was there, it was funny, you know, when my mom passed a couple years ago, at 96, having survived that. Yeah.
And by the way, who became a good friend of my mom's in Florida.
That's
did you know
right.
that?
I didn't know they were that close. Really?
Yeah, she used to go, every time I would bring my kids down to Florida to visit my mom, your mom would come over and hang out with all of us.
She never told me anything.
Yeah.
She never told me. Wow. No. Wow. She had a whole other life.
Secrets.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, she did end up in Florida. She liked it in Florida a lot.
And she was
very
great.
Republican, so she really liked Florida. Yeah.
Exactly.
She got letters from the Bushes, the whole thing. But your mom is the one we have to talk about because she was outrageous. What a character. What a sweetheart.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
great.
Well, what was your experience? Well, I'm going to return to my mom, okay? Because I want to sort of do a chronology here.
Okay.
All right, so going to school, did you ever eat lunch at school?
Yeah, oh, yeah. And I think you had that sour milk in the cartons, the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah. I
Chocolate.
mean, I don't remember food as being center in any of my experiences, really. I mean, I think it was just something... I was so skinny. I was just like in my little uniform and everything, you know. I have sad-looking pictures of me. Really
I remember one specific
looking.
Picture of you, actually.
With the ponytails and the big eyes and really skinny. Yeah, I mean, I ate, but that was my body, just really skinny.
So no going out to eat with this group?
No, I mean, no, I don't remember that. But once, I started to say when my mom passed, the sisters all went to my little house in Maine, and we were talking about experiences, and it's so clear, you know, at the top, like the ones that were at the bottom had all these memories of both my dad and my mom and going places and spending time and doing all this. But if you were at the top, you were more like maintenance, you know. You were like the hip that the kid was on.
Yeah.
So you were never, I mean, it didn't seem weird at the time.
Right.
But you really weren't free to go shopping with my mom because you were left holding a baby or
the
two.
second mom.
Yeah, definitely. And my sisters that are younger say they remember me bathing them and putting them down because, I mean, it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
At one point we had 2 sets of bunk beds and 1 single bed in a room. So it's kind of like a barracks, kind of like prison.
Right.
And so our experiences were all different depending on where you are in the family. And I think that later it became more outgoing and, you know, there were less mouths to feed and that kind of thing. But I think everybody was just struggling to keep it together. My dad became he gave up his dreams because of me, because he couldn't be in show business anymore and had to get a real job. So he was an early producer and stage manager in early days of TV and ended up at Ogilvy and Mather as eventually a vice president and kind of handling talent. So he was one of the Mad Men in advertising, which we put off looking at that series for quite a while. But so he was commuting all the time.
Right,
So,
I remember that was the time when I knew your dad.
Yeah.
Lovely man, by the way.
Yeah, very lovely. And he sang, and he did community theater.
And a wonderfully sonorous voice.
Very self-consciously sonorous, yes.
Right.
Kind of like he was always talking to someone that was filming something.
Yes, yeah. I remember that.
But yes, he had a very beautiful, beautiful voice.
So you're in public school, you move on from public school, and you're going to go to college.
So I apply to college, I get in at Emerson, and I have to say that
you were doing theater when you were in high school, yes? No?
I mean, like the silliest plays you could imagine
that
everybody that was around was in. And I had a teacher in my junior year who was quite lovely. We did a ridiculous play that year, but she was great. She was in charge of the drama department. Carolyn Dolinick, thank you very much, because what happened was, in my school, high school, not very many kids went to college. It was a working class. And some of them went to Vietnam. And my parents weren't really very knowledgeable because I was the first one and I didn't know anything, and there weren't really guidance counselors that were guiding anyone. So I got accepted, but then it just evaporated. It just didn't. And so I found myself not able to go anywhere. But Carolyn Dolinick, who I had been in her play, was going off to Catholic University to get her master's. And my grandparents lived within walking distance of Catholic University. And she somehow wrangled me to get into that and to the drama department area of Catholic U, because I didn't need a room, and also I needed a job because I had to work my way through. So I got on the switchboard of Catholic University. I did other things like cutting hair, if you remember.
Yep. Oh boy, do I remember, sure.
With those scissors that fake it because they look like teeth.
Yes.
So you can't really see when you mess up so badly.
Thinning shears.
When you had great hair, so it didn't. But I also cleaned apartments and cut hair and did that kind of thing while I was living with my grandparents.
Now, I need you to describe for the audience your grandparents' house.
My grandparents had never had anyone live with them. Let me preface it with that. Because when my grandfather remarried, and if you look at Who Do You Think You Are on NBC, you'll see there's a whole story about that. But he married someone who had a daughter who was in 8th grade or something when they get married. She went to boarding school. My mother had never lived with them. So they had never lived with anybody. They didn't understand really what college was about or anything. And it was a lovely, one of those attached, kind of like a brownstone, a row house?
Yep, row house.
And my grandfather, as a good Italian, loved opera and had the opera piped into every room of the house.
At maximum.
At maximum.
Volume.
He would record it, and it was coming from Baltimore. He had a special setup to record it. And it even was coming through chairs that you sat in. I don't know how he did that. Needless to say, I hated opera by the time I left. It did not work for me.
What was the food like in their house?
Oh, their house, the food was, I mean, my grandfather did cook, but all the time I knew my grandfather, he was limping from strokes and heart attacks and whatever.
That's my memory of it.
Yeah, he was an amateur photographer, and a very good photographer, so he was always kind of limping around with a big, huge camera on one shoulder. And I would go to Mass with them on Sundays and everything, but I wasn't really fulfilling what they thought it was going to be like to have me there. They expected a lot more time. I was working, and I was going to school, and I was going to the library, which was nearby.
Right.
And then I started dating you, so that was a plus. And so I was ready to leave. We met when I was 17. Chris was like the star. He was a graduate student. And Catholic U is not really like Juilliard or, where everybody's learning acting or Carnegie Tech. It's mostly focused on the graduate students.
Right. The undergrads were the peons, really.
Yes, we were the peons, exactly. Yeah. And I was below the peons. I was even, because my voice wasn't quality enough for the Shakespearean whatever. And
the school did a lot of classical plays.
He was the lead in everything. Everything. He was like the golden boy of, and he's still gorgeous, but he was, he was it. He was doing everything. Maybe Michael Christopher every now and then.
Right.
But he was like the supporting strange one.
Yes,
You were the hero.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Well,
Michael Procaccino, who became Michael Christopher, who became a famous playwright and actor, and still acts and is now directing. By the way, I still am in touch with him.
Oh.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Michael in a long time. We used to be in touch, but
I'm the only one that wasn't in touch?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And so when I met Chris, I thought, and correctly so, that he knew everything, because he took me to, black and white movies and introduced me to literature and basically saved my life, actually, with his kindness. Because you can imagine I wasn't too stable coming out of this environment. And he was incredibly patient. And plus I was, running around and whatever. And so really I credit you with my foundation and my survival.
Thank you. That's very kind.
One of the reasons I'm here is just to publicly say that.
So when you went home on breaks, did you go home on breaks? I don't remember.
Sometimes I had to work. I worked at the post office one Christmas and got home just a little bit later, just a little bit in time. But no, I wasn't going back. My parents they were busy. They were still pretty overwhelmed. And so I did, I ran away once when I was 10 and they never noticed. So it didn't change much as I got older. I don't know if that was true or that was their strategy, just not to acknowledge. I had like put on black and gone to the only place I thought of, which was where they were building new houses, like 12 blocks away or something. And then I went home and nobody noticed.
There was a lot going on.
There was so much going on.
Yeah.
I mean, these two people who had no parental anything to model, ended up with this brood. And plus my mom had a number of miscarriages, so she was just basically pregnant all the time.
She was pregnant at our wedding. You remember that?
How could I forget? She didn't really want, at the last minute she decided, what happened was, we said, look, I want to move out and we're going to live together. And you definitely couldn't do that unless you were married at that time.
No, right.
Back in the Middle Ages in a Catholic college. And so we planned this and I said, we could do it anywhere, we can whatever. And they loved Chris. They loved Chris. But then suddenly something happened between my parents and she decided, well, what happened was she was pregnant. That's what happened between my parents. And so I think she was embarrassed. She was 44. And she didn't say that.
Yeah.
She just said, no, now you can't get married. And I was like, well, can we just do a little tiny, no, if I say you can't get married, you can't get married. My father, on the other hand, did not take that. So you know what happens then. There's this huge schism
disconnect,
across the aisles. And so she did come to the wedding.
Whose side was she on and whose side was he on?
She was in a black raincoat sitting at the back of the church for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
And none of my siblings could come except my brother that was right under me, who insisted upon coming. My dad came. He insisted upon coming and luckily hooked up with one of the bridesmaids. So it was a very successful trip.
That's the first I've heard of that one. And interestingly, the wedding reception we had it at a theater outside of D.C. because I was working there, or I was going to be working there, and we told everybody.
And it was also connected to Catholic University.
Yes, right, which was connected, but it was an equity theater, great equity theater, and we had everybody bring stuff, It was a potluck reception. Everybody brought their own liquor, they brought their own food, and we had a great time. It was a wonderful,
and
wonderful
my dress
thing.
was Velcroed together because I didn't know how to sew, really, enough. And my bridesmaids made theirs, and we took, you know, ivy off of buildings and from my bouquet. And there's a great picture of the two of us in profile that a friend took with a clothesline hanging across this very serious picture.
Right.
Yeah, but it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was great fun because we did it.
Yeah.
We didn't have to kowtow to anybody.
It wasn't stressful,
No,
except the
not at
ceremony
all.
was pretty long.
Yeah, well, because we did a combination of a Greek Orthodox rite. It wasn't actually a Greek Orthodox priest, but the Roman Catholic Greek rite and the Roman Catholic rite. So there were the crowns and the processions and the foliage. It was an extraordinary
It
event.
looked really impressive.
Looked
it was
great.
like
Yeah, right.
serious.
Very theatrical.
Yeah.
Very theatrical.
But was your dad there? He wasn't there, was he?
I don't
Hadn't he
remember. I know
taken
mom
off by
was.
your
I think
mom
mom
was?
Definitely my mom was.
So we had your mom, my mom at the back of the church, one dad.
Oh, that was, by then my father had left my mother.
Yeah, yeah, I
this
think so.
soap opera goes on, folks.
With a note on the TV.
With
if
a
I
note on
remember
the television
correctly.
sets, yeah.
In Beckley, West Virginia.
Yeah, that's right. And my mom subsequently, despite the fact that she had no education, very little education, and no work history, became a very famous nanny. Did you know?
And companion.
And companion,
like
yeah.
for older, like with Rita Hayworth.
She lived with Rita Hayworth for a couple of years when Rita had dementia.
She never met a person she didn't like.
True. Yeah, the most
She
unforgettable.
was like something that should be in Reader's Digest, the most
Exactly.
interesting people I've ever met kind of person. She taught me to, if you're going to store something or you want to keep it pressed, put it under your mattress. Mm-hmm. Avolemino soup.
Avolemino soup, of course.
Got through many a cramping every month
Oh, really?
with avolemino soup.
Yeah.
That was the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was so sweet and so funny.
Do you remember any of the cooking that we did during those times?
Well, I remember making something where I didn't cook the rice before I put it in the thing, and the rice was still not cooked.
A little crunchy?
Yeah, it was a little crunchy, but I think I pretty much bowed to your expertise in the cooking.
I did a fair
mean,
amount of
later when we lived in Pound Ridge, and I was vegetarian. I think you were too. There was a lot of baking
Yes.
and all kinds of combinations of things, because that's what you do when you don't have children. You can get experimental and,
Right.
do interesting things when you're cooking.
There was a book that was the rage at the time called Diet for a Small Planet.
Yes.
Remember that book?
Yes, and the Tassajara.
And the Tassajara Red Book. Yeah, making a lot of bread, and also combining various plant-based proteins in order to have
Until
complete
the lid blew off, I would hold on to that stuff and combine it with other things. But after a while, it gets a little funky.
Yeah.
But yeah,
right.
but that's the great thing about being vegetarian. Just everything goes with everything, so you can just.
Yeah, but it's hard to travel, and if you're on movie sets and
no.
Yeah. All right. So I actually was thinking about that vegetarian period. How do you remember being food conscious once the times changed and you got out of the house, that this was something that was like on your mind, that was important to you and your health?
Well, I think this, being a hippie.
Yeah.
And growing things, and yeah, I was aware of the health value, and I definitely gravitated towards growing things and whatever,
Well, when we lived, Susan and I had a house in Westchester, and we had a neighbor. The reason why we ended up there was because the great Colleen Dewhurst was, I did a play with Colleen at the Westport Country Playhouse, okay? It was a two-hander, and Colleen became a great friend of ours, and through her, we decided, let's get out of the city, because we were living in an apartment over the railroad yards at 72nd Street and Riverside Drive, across from Needle Park. What was called Needle Park, Riverside Park.
But no, Needle Park is on 79th. We were on 72nd. That was
Right.
the first apartment where
Right,
we were
right,
robbed.
right, okay.
But then we moved up. Once you got in the Rothschilds, immediately, Hal Linden
That's right.
clued
that was
us
in the
into
90s.
this enormous, fabulous apartment
Yeah.
that was on 110th, 101st.
Right.
that big ass apartment, like a real
New York.
I couldn't afford that apartment now.
No,
I don't know.
nobody could.
Yeah, like with the dining room and the whole thing. And so then from there, is that where we went?
Then we went to
Pound Ridge.
Right. And Colleen's, she had two guys working for her, and one of them was an inveterate gardener, Stuart Jensen. Remember Stuart?
Oh, of course I remember Stuart and Tony. Yeah.
Very colorful couple, gay couple. And Stuart was a fabulous gardener, and I worked with Stuart a lot in the garden, and we created this garden with him, and that's when I started gardening. And now it's it's a disease.
That's a really healthy disease.
It's a very healthy disease. Yeah. Do you remember cooking for people when we were together? Do you remember having any kinds of dinner parties or anything at the? I don't either. You're nodding your head no.
Well, I mean, simple stuff, but I think that we were with a lot of bossy cooks.
Yes.
You know what I mean? When there are people that are really pride themselves and are kind of bullies, you just become a sous chef, really.
Yeah.
And I was fine with that.
Yeah,
I mean,
and particularly with people like Stuart and Tony, who
Stuart and Tony, who were like really serious about doing everything right and everything.
Yeah.
Once it starts to be about doing things right, I get tense. I like to just ad lib a little bit.
Yeah.
But of course, I cooked later for my kids a lot. All of that business.
You're leading me into our next segment.
We're just going and flowing.
Oh yeah. Okay. So now we're off on our own lives. All right. You have a daughter, and by the way, your daughter is an extraordinarily accomplished cook. Yes.
Yes. And
tell
now she's
them about your daughter.
engaged to a cook,
Ooh.
to a chef.
Oh, really?
Who left being a chef because he wants to spend more time with the kids, and he was he was gone on the weekend. But she, and also she's got an Italian father, and I was living in Italy till, except when I was working, to be with him and his family. So that definitely, they are Nazis when it comes to making pasta sauce. When you're doing a tomato sauce, like you have to put the carrots in the right order. I mean, like, at least where I was, the right amount of sugar, the right,
What part of Italy?
Rome. We were in Rome.
Okay.
And so for the first 3 years, I was actually living and cooking in Rome. And I definitely started having more fun with the family. And also, I've never been good on like really big meat. Doesn't appeal to me, but I mean, to cook. But all kinds of quiches, and I remember making some vegetarian quiches.
Yeah.
I liked baking. I liked the baking of the bread. Now I don't know why I'm not. I thought during the lockdown everybody bought like so much sourdough, right? So much grain, and I just was like, that's so scientific. How did I do that before?
Yeah.
It just seemed overwhelming.
Well, yeah. Well, that's because we're also in the thrall of the tartine cookbook. I mean, the bread book, and the proper way to do it, rather than it's being something that we just want to feel. It's so much of baking to me is about feel.
And not having children that are screaming, waiting for their food. You just can't relax when that's happening, when you're trying to get them bathed and the homework and it's just not conducive. And then you do something and they don't eat it. And then you hate your children. You take all this time to make a sauce that's so cool, and they're like, I told you I don't eat chicken anymore. And you're like, when? When did you stop eating cucumbers? When?
Just now.
My boys still do that. Oh, I don't eat avocados. I'm like, when did that happen? Right? I stopped with avocados. Seriously?
Right. So tell me about this Italian influence.
But my brother O'Brien had a restaurant.
He's a
like
restaurateur.
people in my family ended up being serious cooks. And I remember, and all my kids cook. One of them got through college making very special little baked goods for other kids, and brown. And I kept saying to my boys, just learn how to make a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You have to know that if you're going to be dating, you have to know But they're good. But O'Brien, my youngest, the youngest of us, who was named after the doctor that delivered everyone, Charles O'Brien. His name is O'Brien. It had a restaurant until COVID that he had for 15 years, and he's a serious. Yeah, he lost it during COVID, but he now has a little brewery he's trying to work with. But he's like, seriously, you can't do any. He just loves food and everything that he does.
Oh, how great!
Yeah. He's like seriously serious of foodie, but he has 3 small screaming children, so
Yeah.
it's always with a little bit of tension.
Now, did you cook with your kids when they were young?
Oh yeah. We did all those things you're supposed to do to be a good mom. We cooked together and baked together, and
Did Eva? But that's part of what she does. Yes.
She does recipes. She's a lifestyle. She's like an affordable Gwyneth Paltrow.
Her name?
You can go to Happily Ever After, and you'll find she does everything from telling you how to lifestyle blog, how to make cocktails, how to cook food, how to carve pumpkins, how to do your makeup, how to do your hair, how to plan a wedding, how to do, all of that stuff. And every now and then she writes really funny things about how much she hates her children at the moment or something. And which really is nice to have someone who isn't perfect.
Yeah.
And she probably would say I never cooked with her because she doesn't remember anything that I did with her, really. I don't get much credit, but...
How about the boys?
No, the boys are mine. Yes, they love me. No, I mean, Eva does too, but she's very... she has systems. And when she talks about life growing up, it sounds like we raised her either in a gypsy caravan or a circus. People coming over all the time, and we were doing plays and doing art projects, and there were all these people dancing in our living room, and this was horrible, And I was like, she's right. That's what happened.
She just wanted a normal life.
She wanted a boring, normal life. Yeah.
God.
But she's great, and she's a great mother, and her kids are hilarious, and she's got a baby. She had all her babies at home. She had one on the first day of lockdown. So if you want to know what COVID's like these days, he's walking and talking and very opinionated and very independent. And then she has a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. So they're still tiny.
My father-in-law told me a number of years ago, he said, you love your children. You do anything for your children, but wait until you have grandchildren. That's when life begins. I mean, there's a member of the audience here now, tonight. A good friend of mine, they just had their first granddaughter, and they're besotted. And that's what happens. There's something really magical about it. Now, do you do any entertaining? Do you have people over for dinner?
Yeah.
Lunch?
Yeah, but again, I have some very bossy friends who like to do it. But we, especially during lockdown, we took turns making extravagant meals. I put on like 10 pounds at least. And everybody took turns choosing what we were going to watch that night. I was isolating with my boys eventually. I spent the first couple of months in the city by myself, where I realized I was it was the first time I hadn't worked in my life, where I hadn't either been a mother or had a job of some kind, and it was fantastic. And I found out I was definitely an introvert. And my daughter said to me, you never knew that? Of course you're an introvert. And I was like, I didn't really know that, but now it's confirmed. And then I went to the country house, and Jack and Miles isolated, and then we all met there. And we started a garden. Jack planted a big vegetable garden, and everybody took turns cooking and baking and everything else. And so that was, if there's a lot of people around. For myself, no, I don't do very many.
Right, but you facilitate the circumstance that allows it to happen.
Yeah, but when I'm not living with someone right now, I'm not living with anyone except now I'm on cats. I had dogs, they died. Now I'm back to cats.
Speaking of cats, I have to mention a couple of names. Laverne.
Yes.
Now this was a cat of all cats. Okay.
Yeah, she was cool.
Yeah. Can you describe Laverne to the folks here? Any of you who are cat
No, I want to hear you describe Laverne.
All right. So Laverne was one of the strangest animals in the history of animatronics. She was solid white. She had some kind of a problem with her eyes where they were constantly kind of rotating. And
I wanted to put eyebrows on her. Did I do that? I put eyebrows because I wanted to see who she looked like, because she had some kind of creature in her that was asking to come out.
She was possessed with something. And we would have friends who would come over, and sometimes Laverne would sit on a table like this. You're the person, right? And Laverne would sit on the table like this and just do this. Like that. And it would drive people crazy. Right?
Do you remember Chuck?
Chuck. Yeah.
Chuck was really like the Marlon Brando of cats. He had kind of that nose, and he was red. And right before we moved, he disappeared. He left.
Yeah.
He just got the word.
Well, it was kind of a rotation going on anyway, because we lived right on a road.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were...
Debbie got hit.
Yeah.
Pearl got hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got, well...
You have cats.
Well, I had my dog that was 16 years old that I had taken everywhere was a little dog. I had big dogs, I have little dogs, and eventually life happens. But Penny went everywhere with me, and so when she passed, I was just devastated.
Yeah.
I had turned into that old lady with a little dog, and I was devastated.
What kind of dog?
Just a mutt, but so cute, like a creature. And she would sit on the chair on sets, and she would be quiet, but then she would get excited if you let her. And she was just the perfect traveling companion. So I just lost it, and I came back. And my one son, Jack Henry, has a pity mix, and my other son, Miles, rescued 2 cats. He says, you should choose a man with cats because they respect independent women. Someone who doesn't need your tail to be wagging when you come in the door.
Pretty interesting metaphor.
So he convinced me that since I couldn't get over, I just felt like I couldn't betray Penny by getting another dog.
Yeah.
I just was too shook to get a cat. So I got, but this was COVID, so you couldn't visit with the cats. And there was this cat who was feral and 5 and chubby, and she has black on her mouth, so she always looks sad, which made me hysterical, because she looked like those pictures, the picture they had, she looked like those saints that are looking up, very painful.
Yes, right.
Anyway,
you would know.
So I got Ida, and I felt she really, after a while, she stopped being so feral, and I kind of, took the time with her. But she seemed kind of sad, so I thought, well, I'll get another cat to keep her company. Again, you can't visit with the cats because it's COVID.
Yeah, right.
I get this little sweetie one. She's very tiny, even though she's 2. She's very small. She's just had a massive operation because of her organs were outside her body. All these are rescues, right? So I get this little orange cat. She's so fragile and so tiny, and Ida wants to kill her. Every chance she gets, no matter, even though I introduce them in the proper way, she tries to kill her. She beats the shit out of her. Ooh. This goes on for a year. I'm trying all kinds of things that you plug in the wall and spray, and I talk to her, I threaten her, I do. Everyone's like, you have to get rid of Ida. Get rid of Ida, she's just a bitch, get rid of her. And I'm like, who's gonna want this 5-6-year-old cat, chubby cat?
Right.
Now, I can't get rid of Ida, and I feel like I owe Sweetie because she's been in this domestic abuse situation for a year. So I talked to my vet. My vet said, well, maybe she just should be a cat on her own. I mean, maybe she just doesn't like other cats. That's not the answer I was looking for. So then I talked to the people that I've been getting these other 2 cats from, and I say, what about if I get another cat? Do you think that would change the dynamic? And they're like, yeah, it would change the dynamic. I said, well, what about taking Ida? Do you think she's adoptable? So now I get a 3rd cat, a 9-month-old male, Harry. Harry is so lovable and so sweet. No one wants to play with Harry.
Right, they're all
Harry's like
ostracized.
he goes up to Sweetie and he's like just trying to touch. She's just like, what do you think you're doing? And Ida, so they run around a little bit and everything. But now I have 3 cats in a teeny apartment in New York that don't get along.
Your life sounds ideal.
Yes, it's ideal. So that's my story. So that's right now. I've had Harry now for a year, and he's cuddly. My apartment's so small, I didn't have a door on my bedroom, but now I got a door on my bedroom just so I could kind of manage the, equation
the
a little bit
separation,
better. So that's where I am right now. I'm back to cats. And I said,
we had
what
5
makes,
at one point,
That is a cat person. A cat lady is definitely, when you're over 2, you become a cat lady, I was told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's a circumstance. All right. One thing I want to cover.
That was a boring story, wasn't it?
No, actually, it wasn't. No,
not
at all.
Thank you for making me feel like I'm not good.
One thing I want to talk about briefly before we conclude, and that is that
I came on this way. We have to talk for at least a long time.
Well,
right?
actually,
we can't just.
Well, I understand that you are involved, as you are, in many projects that have to do with the humane treatment of other human beings. Okay, and that there is, and this particular organization called One Fair Wage is something that's close to me because I grew up in a restaurant. I know how hard these people work, right? Tell us a little bit about One Fair Wage.
Well, I don't know if I wasn't aware until they contacted me, but every time the minimum wage goes up and has been voted on since the 60s, they carve out restaurant workers because the restaurant lobby is so strong. So everyone has a $15 wage, say,
right,
but not waitresses. They could be earning it, but they're not required to
There's
give
no
them
minimum
because
wage.
they're going to live on tips. Waitresses and waiters and restaurant people have the highest percentage of single moms of any work that you can get.
Right.
They also are predominantly brown and black. So there's 7 states have changed that, and now in New York, in June, in the beginning of June, there's legislation that is attempting to change that, and there's 7 more states that are lined up that they think will change that. And so that's what's going on. So One Fair Wage has been working in various states to help. There's a very good, oh God, I forgot his name now, but very good people that introduced the bill. I was up in Albany as part of an action with the group and got arrested. And what's interesting about it, about getting that particular arrest, because I have been arrested on other occasions for similar kind of things. So we blocked a doorway. It wasn't violent, luckily, although the guy that was reading me my rights got very nervous. I kept saying, it's okay, it's okay. He was really red. If you see a picture of him facing me, he's like all red and young. And I felt bad for him. But when we were...
police officer?
Police, yeah. Albany police, whatever they're called in Albany. But when we were being booked, I was with two of the organizers, and when we were waiting to fill out all the forms that they do and whatever, and give you your summons, I said, this is why we're here, and explained to this woman who was in charge of everybody. And I said, and you're not, she said, it's just that everybody's tired because, there's been a lot of demonstrations lately, which is a good thing. And she said, when you have to arrest people in wheelchairs, that's really terrible. I was like, yeah, I bet that's horrible. And I said, but you're really on our side because we need you to arrest us because that's how this is going to get in
how the message
news
gets out,
and how people are going to find out, because I didn't know anything about it. So actually, you're working with us, and there's so many people that you're really helping by working with us. So I was supposed to go before a judge on the 15th, which was like 4 days after this arrest happened, which bummed me out because, first of all, Albany is far away, almost as far as it took me to get here.
Right.
And it's one of my boys' birthdays is the 15th of May. So I was like, am I going to be able to, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and how I'm going to go, it's going to be such a nightmare. Because in some places, like if you're arrested in DC, you can go and pay your fine then, or, they have different rules for different states. So there was a lawyer on site, as there usually is when there's a planned arrest. There's some fabulous, you know, pro bono lawyer that's with you to make sure everything, they treat you right and whatever. And so I kept calling and saying, well, do I have to go in? Am I going to have to be in Albany on Monday? And he said, we haven't heard anything. We haven't heard anything. So no, I don't think you're going to have to. And somebody just made it all disappear.
Just wiped it.
Maybe that fabulous woman that I was talking to. So that was really lovely.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I didn't have to go back.
All right. Well, for those of my listeners and viewers and those here in the audience, just remember the name of the organization, One Fair Wage.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because it's very important. The people you go out to eat with who serve you, who create that wonderful experience that you have, need help.
And they're very harassed, too. That's the other thing. When you're in a job that you have to keep and you're being harassed all the time, like they said sometimes during the pandemic, guys were saying to them, take down your mask so I can see how much to tip you.
You're kidding.
That happened a lot.
Wow.
You know, and you're, especially if you're the breadwinner of your family, you're really in a difficult situation,
you
know,
have
in
to,
terms
pardon
of,
the expression, eat it.
Yeah. So, I mean, they take quite a bit.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
I know this from experience.
And work so hard. A restaurant is so hard.
It's brutal work.
Yeah.
Brutal work.
So my son's girlfriend, Jack Henry's girlfriend, Greek, and has a restaurant in Vegas.
You're in Vegas.
Full circle.
Oh.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, he was so happy to hear about the origins of the name Sarandon, and he said in Greece they have adopted me.
Oh.
Yeah, as an adopted Greek.
Yeah. Well, when we were there, I took the entire family to Greece last summer. All the grandchildren we went to Athens, and then we went to a place called Porto Heli, which is in the Peloponnese, down at the bottom of the Peloponnese. And we were looking for relatives because I'd lost touch with all the relatives. We couldn't find any. A cousin of mine recently, Peter, I don't know if you remember Peter from Florida anyway.
Whose son is that?
Costa and Lula.
Lula. I remember, yeah.
There we go. Their son went to Greece, but went to the islands. And he went to an island called Kalymnos, and the island of Kalymnos is filled with carduliuses, what was my mother's maiden name. Filled with them. They're everywhere. They're like dotted.
Lousy with cardulius.
The islands are lousy with them. So we do have people there.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it's great. All right, so I have a final question for you that I hope will lead to something. This is the memory question that I ask everybody.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. All right. So if there's any...
You waited so many years to test me. I'm trying to... My mind is gone.
So if there's any food memory that you have that involves a smell or a taste or an event that brings up something really special in your life, what would it be? Something that can be something that you were involved with your kids, something with your brothers and sisters. Is there anything that...
Well, I mean, I think that Thanksgiving, you know, and that gravy and the stuffing continues to be something that really is emotional, because I do remember, even though it was crazy, everybody sitting down at the table, but that image and you know, since then we've had a lot of Thanksgivings with bringing other people in and whatever, and I remember, you know, many times a few times, at least 3 times on location in my trailer, chopping celery, onions, apples, and stuff to have this for the stuffing for the next day, you know, because I'd have to put the turkey in the next day, or we would have on Bull Durham, we pushed Thanksgiving to the weekend because we had to work on, we voted, the company voted, so we recorded the Thanksgiving Day parade and then had Thanksgiving on the weekend, and so that one and another one, always chopping to do that, and that to me is a family day, more than Christmas. I don't know that there was a Christmas thing. Christmas is so heavy with consuming, with having to buy shit and everything. Right. But the Thanksgiving somehow always bringing in stray people. So I'd say that. I mean, on the Greek side, I've got to say the avolemino soup and taramasalata, because every time I'm in a restaurant that doesn't have those two things, I think they're not really.
No, and
they're
it's
not really good.
and it's almost never like it is at home.
Yeah.
And that's essentially because Greek cooking has evolved, obviously, over the years. Some of the Greek cooking in Greece is just amazing. But the home cooking is just that.
When I did The Tempest, we were in the Mani Peninsula. And, everybody says, well, Greece doesn't have that great food. But everything was so fresh.
Fresh.
The tomatoes really tasted like tomatoes.
Yeah.
The fish was so fresh.
Yeah.
The bread was so fresh. That actually it was so much better than being in somewhere where it's really heavy but not that tasty. And they were very good food.
Yeah.
Great cheese. Feta always turns me on. I love the olives, everything.
That brings to mind, actually, another question that I earlier wanted to ask and I forgot about, and that is, because I have one, is there a location that you remember where the catering was amazing?
Oh, you mean like working?
Working.
The
lunches on set.
Oh, that's tough.
Ever?
I'm sure there was one, but not in the United States.
No.
I think it could have been we were at Cinecittà for the second part of The Tempest. We were on location in Greece, and then we went into the studio where they built a set that looked like the house.
Right.
And with cassavetes. And that food, and plus they don't care if they come back on time.
Yeah,
They're
right.
just like, they don't even care if you're. I was filming something else in Italy where the food was also quite good, and I went going from room to room, my outfit would change because it just looked so good. I'm like, but wasn't I wearing this? Yeah, but it looks so good. Or Etta Chano's escaping and all hell's breaking loose, and they've just hung her father, Mussolini, and she's going, and there are people online trying to get, and I'm in a white raincoat, and I'm like, isn't that a little conspicuous? For someone who's trying to sneak out, the father's just been hung upside down in the square, but it looks so good, and the food was so good.
Yeah.
And the time, they know how to live in Italy.
Oh,
They
boy.
do. At least I haven't been back in the last few years.
Yeah. Spaniards are the same. I had an experience in Spain where we had
Where
catered
in Spain?
in Jerez de la Frontera, which is in the south. Shooting a movie with Sean Connery and an amazing cast.
Wow.
And the catering was literally every day fresh fish for lunch, great salads, paellas. The food
I was just in Barcelona, getting one of those honoring things, and that, I gotta say, the ratio of museums there to people. There's so many great museums, but also such good food.
Yeah.
But Italy, also, it's pretty hard to find a bad meal in Italy.
Yeah.
Even the little places. I don't know, maybe not the touristy places.
Well, for a half Italian.
Half Sicilian.
Right, half Sicilian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, guys. That was really fun.
Thank you. Cooking by heart. Straight up.